Logging on now to manage your trades. And the first form that appears is the control panel. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about what's on this form and then going through the basics of scans. So on this form we have the main menu options here. Also have a little bit of information about some of the activity that's happening on the system. So in the data load tab you'll see a list of exchanges saying the last daily load date. Now this tells you when the system has actually downloaded the stocks for that day, for that exchange, and the date and time that it was loaded. We can see here in this particular example the ASX last daily load date was on the 20th of January 2015 and it was loaded at 5:17 p.m. So the exchange itself closes at 4 p.m. You grab the data at 5 and by 5:17 it's loaded into the system. Another option shown to you here is the stock splits. So this is a list of stocks which either have or are about to split in a ratio. So as an example here we have on the 20th of January 2015 for the Nasdaq exchange the stock called GENE, Genetic Technologies Limited. Before the split it was in a ratio of 1:1 and after the split it has a ratio of 5. So the stock will actually increase in price in a ratio of 1:5 effective as of the 20th of the 1st 2015. So to put that into context, whenever you're shown a chart for this stock, you'll be getting the most recent price for that stock in this new ratio, and historically it will also be shown in that new ratio as well, so that you get a clear view of how the stock looked historically without any major jumps and gaps in the candles, so to give you a smooth transition as better for you to detect previous peaks and troughs, etc. So after having loaded the data for a particular exchange, the system will then automatically run scans against the stocks in those exchanges, and this is where I'll now bring into the conversation about scanning. So we have a menu option scans and search scans. Let's bring up the list of scans. So we can see here a list of scans, the most recent to historic. Currently there are some scans in progress, and that's the percent complete of that scan. Here are the completed list. So just to explain, when it's in progress it means that the exchange has had data loaded for it, and systems automatically then running scans against that data. The scan has a default name starting with the exchange, DLY for daily, TT short is the name of the scan type, which I'll go into more detail later, followed by the date that it's applicable for. To filter the list, you've got a basic search criteria here, which just covers the user and the exchange, defaulted to all, and then you have a more detailed filter here where you can drill down to get specific scans for specific exchanges, etc. I will show you an example here where I'll just show the daily scans for the ASX. So under periodicity, all, which is just daily and weekly, I'm going to choose daily, the exchange, ASX, scan type all, and by default you get the last month's worth of scans. If there's more than 30 it will show only the last 30 scans, and it will show them in most recent to historic. So just pressing the search button now, and here's the list of ASX scans. To view the list of scans that were automatically produced by the system, There is a column here called created by, and here are the users. Now the system itself I've considered a user, and they're the ones that are automatically generated. So I'm going to do another filter here on user, and I'm just going to choose the system service just to filter out the ones done by the system. A scan uses a period of time as its range to collect information about how it's trending and how it goes to meet the rules of that scan type. So for instance, in these scans we see the ASX daily 3 trends short for the 20th of January. The range of candles that it used commenced from the 19th of the 1st, 2010. So you can see it's a 5-year range that I'm scanning to determine whether or not the rules for that scan type are met. Let's now have a look at a particular scan. I'm going to choose the ASX Daily 3 Trends Long for the 20th of January 2015, and let's see what stocks have been chosen in that scan. So just clicking the View button, and we can see the list of stocks. Now I'll describe a little bit about the what's on the header here, and a little bit about the filter information that's presented to you for that particular scan. So in this particular scan, 3 Trends Long, it has a specific set of rules which we'll use to scan that 5-year range of candles. Now they are given a score. So the score here is shown to you, and it's presented as a percentage. So we have here a stock AJX, which got a score of 88%, and we have here down the bottom here a list going down to 63%. So the higher the score, the more rules have been met, and the better the stock is for that particular scan type. Now we can see here on the header that it says view scores above 60%. Now by default I chose 60% because stocks below that generally aren't worth looking at, because there's not enough of the rules that have been met for that scan type to show on this list. So the columns across here allow you to further filter this list of stocks. So the first column here that you can filter on is a true column. Now that true represents yes, all the rules for this particular scan type, 3 Trends Long, have been met, and here is that list. No other filters have been chosen by default yet, and I'll go and explain some of these filters now. The first filter across, RR, stands for reward to risk ratio. Now if I hover my mouse over that piece of information, it tells me a little tooltip saying filter on reward risk ratio greater than selected parameter. So what I'm doing behind the scenes in the scans is I'm trying to detect whether the stock will produce a greater than 1-to-1 reward to risk ratio, and I present what I consider the default reward to risk ratio for that stock. So you can see in this list here we have a range 0.4, which tells me that the stock, even though it met all the rules and gets a very high score, it's not good in terms of a reward to risk ratio. So we would like to choose stocks that give us a reward to risk ratio of greater than 1-to-1. Now this next filter here allows us to choose that. So by default it's 1. So stocks that produce a reward to risk ratio of greater than 1-to-1. So let me tick that, and we'll now be shown that further filtered list. So we can see here the list has reduced. The highest scoring stock where a reward to risk ratio is greater than 1-to-1 is now 76%. The next filter across is the number of points of demand that are greater than 1. Now on this system, a point of demand is something that we'd like to hide behind when we're in a long trading list of scans, so that we can choose an appropriate risk stop. Now that will become more evident when we go and view the list of charts when we select this. But at the moment, I defaulted to 1. So I'd like to choose stocks which I have an area that I can hide behind, and usually within an ATR range. So I'm going to tick that and further filter this list. The next filter across is a proximity filter, greater than 0%. So what I do in the scan is that when I look for a reward to risk ratio, behind the scenes I'm looking for an entry point to take the stock, and I'm seeing the last candle and where it sits in relation to that entry point. So for instance, if I need to take an entry point which is just above the previous peak, I will look at where the current candle is, and I will see whether it's in a reasonable range to that peak to decide if it's worthwhile taking at this point in time. Because the candle itself, the last candle, might be quite low in relation to the previous peak. So if it is, it gets a low score. The lowest score, of course, is 0. And in relation to 1 ATR's distance to the entry point, I give it a score as well. So it just gives me a quick view to say, well, is the stock worth taking today, or will I wait? Whoops, forgot to turn my phone off. Okay, so I'll now just tick that box there, proximity greater than 0%, and the list will be further filtered. The last one here, dominant tests. Now, what I do when we show you the list of charts is I have a whole lot of indicators which show you the peaks and troughs, and also what I consider to be the dominant peaks and troughs. Now, when a stock is approaching a dominant peak or a dominant trough, we like to be able to see any stock which has tested that dominant peak, and here I do a count of the number of tests against the previous dominant peak. Because we're in a long list, we want to look at the dominant peaks. So 1, 2, and 2. So this will filter any that where the dominant tests are 0. So we can see here that there's no change once I tick that. So I've now ticked all the filters here, which I consider to be important filters, to reduce this list down to what is potentially the best of the best for this particular scan type, 3 trends long. Now, it's not to say that other stocks which don't appear in this filtered list aren't good stocks to take. They just give me a way of presenting quickly the stocks that I'd like to look at. Now, if I'm a time poor person, I've worked hard all day, I come home and I just want to get a very short list of what potentially is the best of the best, this is what I would do. Another piece of information available to you is a message log, which just tells you some information about the scan that was done. So clicking on the message log tab here, it will give me information that just helps me see why some particular stocks in the ASX that were chosen for the scan didn't make it to the final list. And you can see here some common messages where stocks traded below 5 cents, so I don't consider those worthwhile looking at, and also stocks that haven't traded for a period of time long enough prior to the start or prior to the date of this scan. So for instance, there's a stock here, 3PL, began trading on the 18th of the 8th, 2014. Stock must have commenced trading prior to 19th of July last year to be valid for the scan. So that tells me that the stock hasn't traded for a minimum period of 6 months. So there's not enough trending information that I can gather from that stock to bring it into this scan. I'm now going to go back to the stock results tab where I see that list of filtered stocks, and I'm now going to go to the next stage, which is to actually view that list of 3 stocks and look at the charts. So that list of 3 stocks is now presented to you on the right hand side of this form, and by default it will show you the chart of the first stock. So I'll just orientate you to some of the fields and indicators that you can use on this form. In the header here we just have the details of where we've come from and where we are. So we're in the ASX, we're in a periodicity of daily, the stock is TCL, Transurban Group, and we're looking at the last trading period being Tuesday the 20th of January 2015, and the scan type that was used was a 3 trends long. Now by default the view that we're getting is a 6-month view. So this area here on the form allows us to either go back in history to 9 months, 12 months, 18 months, etc., all the way back to 5 years. So I'm just clicking there to bring it back to a 6-month view. The header bar on the form is green. Now that green is like a quick indicator to me to tell me that all the rules have been met for this particular scan type. It will show itself as red if one or more of the mandatory rules have not been met. On the very top of the form is just an orientation of also where we are in relation to the system. We're on a scan details form. We can go back to the scan results, and I can go back to the charts by just clicking the view all button again. So there we have it. Under the month view is a whole list of indicators that we can use to further give us more clarity about this trend on the chart. So I'm just going to go through a few of them. Peak trough lines. So a lot of this particular set of rules for 3 trends long has to do with the relationship of peaks and troughs and how they go historically. So there's a quick way of just being able to present a line list of the peaks and troughs on this particular chart. As I hover my mouse over the candles, you may see that when I put my mouse on a peak, I get shown just above where the mouse is the word peak and trough information. So I'm just going to hover a little bit there. You can see some of the names are different. In this case it's a dominant peak, a dominant trough, a peak, another peak, another peak. So what makes this a dominant peak as opposed to just a peak? If I click on dominant lines, I will see another overlay where I have drawn what I consider to be the dominant peaks and troughs on this chart. So in this case, why is it a dominant peak? It's because when I click the dominant lines, it presented this as a dominant peak, this is a dominant trough, this is a dominant peak, this is a dominant trough. So visually we can easily see that this particular stock is well and truly in an uptrend. The dominant peaks are rising, the dominant troughs are rising, and also the peaks and troughs are rising as well. Also notice that when I hover my mouse over the candles, this area of the form here changes its information in relation to where my mouse is on which candle. So you can see here that on the last candle, the trend and the dominant trend are showing as uptrend. So this tells me that everything is in alignment for taking a trade in a long position. If I hover my mouse along, you can see that information changing. If I put my mouse in this area here, and we have a look up in that top right corner, we can see the trend is converging and the dominant trend is diverging. Now I'll explain what those terms mean. Just prior to where my mouse is, you can see that the peaks are falling and the troughs are rising. So that tells me that the stock is in a sideways trend, and in fact in relation to the previous peaks and troughs it is converging, so it's becoming more narrow. The dominant trend is diverging. So what does diverging mean? Diverging means, in the context of the blue lines, that we have here the previous dominant peaks are rising and the previous dominant trough is falling. So this dominant trough here is lower than this dominant trough here. So in relation to a longer term or dominant term trend, we have diverging. I am able to easily draw horizontal lines on this chart. I have an option here, chart click. So I'll just click on that button, and it says select what you want to do when you click your mouse on the chart. Do nothing, which is the default, or draw a horizontal line at a peak and trough, and right click will clear all. So I'm going to choose the option to draw a horizontal line at a peak or a trough. So now, in that mode, whenever I click on the chart at a peak or a trough, I'll get a horizontal line. A little red dot will tell me the point at which I clicked, and which represents the peak or the trough. In addition, I put a little label when you draw two horizontal lines, which tells me the price difference between those two lines. So in this particular example, the price difference was minus 24 cents, so a drop of 24 cents, which also represents a drop of 2.88% of the price. I'm going to right click now and just clear those horizontal lines. Now the whole purpose of orientating and being where I am in this system, of showing these three stocks, is that they in theory should be the best of the best stocks to pick for the day. Now what I'm going to do in a subsequent video is to then go into the detail of this area, identify risk reward, and what will be graphically shown to you when I tick this indicator here. We'll be able to see why it is a good pick and what is the risk and reward ratios we should be looking at if we were going to take this trade. There's also other indicators here, volume and relative strength comparison, and I'll explain those also at the time that I go through this identify risk reward. So I hope this has been an informative video for you, just so you can get to the orientation of seeing scans, viewing the list of scans, seeing the results, further filtering the results, and then being presented with those stocks so you can then have a look and see why they are the best of the best stocks to choose.